And Kathleen has suggested, I suggest to you that we do this briefly. I don't want to take time we did last week, but as Kay comes up, please take a moment, go around the room, tell Kay who you are, where you're from, what your status is. Thank you. And welcome, Kay, please.
I have no hope of living up to that, and so I hope you'll forget everything he said while you all introduce yourselves.
I'm Scott Lee, Senior MDiv from Northwest Texas.
Great.
Karen Fox, Junior MDiv from Des Moines, Iowa.
Okay.
Mitch Tollett, Senior MDiv from Texas Diocese.
Adrian Cock, Senior MDiv, Kansas.
Gerard Klingenberg, Midler MDiv from the Diocese of Southeast Florida.
Carol Moorhead, Midler MDiv from West Texas. Donna Gerald, MDiv, Midler, Diocese of Alabama. Christine Mendoza, Midler MDiv, Diocese of Texas.
I'm Rob Dixon, Senior MDiv from Diocese of the Central Gold Coast.
Chris Hartline, Senior MDiv, Hispanic Concentration Studies from Diocese of Olympia. I'm Lauren Kim. I'm also in the Hispanic Concentration from Kansas City, the Diocese of West Missouri, and I'm a Senior MDiv.
Great.
Rob Harris, MDiv Junior from the Diocese of West Texas.
Mary Balfour, Van Zandt, MDiv, Junior, Diocese of Alabama.
Lawrence Wainwright Max from the Diocese of Mississippi Junior MDiv. Corey Coles, Senior MARC Baptist from Austin, Texas.
Cool. It's great to meet you.
I'm Michael Caracino. I'm a Midler from the Diocese of Olympia.
Great. It's good to hear y'all's names and where you're from. I have some connections in some of the places where you you either reside or from which you come. Before I get going, because this is a bold topic and it would be helpful to know with whom we're starting, so I'll spend more time on the things that are helpful and less time on things that you are sort of old news to you. So how many of you all have done, for instance, the Kaleidoscope Institute with Eric Law? Oh, several.
I had a modified version here.
Okay, so you've done a little bit of Kaleidoscope, or that's usually the first segment. Okay. How about other either cultural competency training in business or something like that? How many? Few. Or anti-racism training, sensitivity. Everybody's done some of that. It's required in seminary, right? Okay. That's helpful to get started. So if I move quickly over something that you want more information about or talk about, stop me, because I'm going to assume that you all know some of this stuff that is the background, and try and spend a little bit more on the stuff in terms of how it has lived out in my own parish. I want to acknowledge that my skills at PowerPoint are less than I really had remembered they were. So if I fail to advance these slides correctly, you will forgive me. Like that. Oh, here we go. Okay. I'm the rector of an Episcopal congregation in Dallas, Texas. And Dallas is a big metroplex, pretty much contiguous with Fort Worth, so Arlington and Grand Prairie are between them. But millions of people living in, 30 square miles, or so. That's not the right number of miles, but it's, a big city. But Ascension, which is not an urban parish, but more suburban, is in North Dallas, is in an area, 3-mile radius of Ascension, has 200,000 people in that area. It's a very densely populated and very diverse in comparison with the rest of America. So it's 30% African American, which in the census numbers includes African natives, people who were born there, and African Americans. 30% Hispanic and 30% Anglo. The rest is Asian and mixed race. And I don't actually think that adds up to 100. It's surrounded by neighborhoods, some of which are upper middle class, and some of which are lower economic status neighborhoods, and a lot of multifamily housing in that area. Vickery Meadows, which is just south of Ascension by about 1.5 miles, is an area of Dallas which is multifamily housing that is the first stop for many refugees and immigrants. So it's very close to the parish, which is an important part of our story. So Ascension itself was founded in 1957. It's a broad church parish and a high church diocese, which is important also in our story. No smells and bells as much as I love them. It was integrated with African Americans in the 70s, which was unusual in the city of Dallas. There's been a lot of racial tension in Dallas through the years, both between African Americans and Anglos and with the Hispanic populations. And that tension continues and is largely unacknowledged. In fact, I think Dean Travis gave me the best book about that before he left Dallas, so I would understand it. The Settlement or something like that. You did. Pretty sure. It might have been, I don't know. Maybe not. Whoops, wait, let me go back. How do I go back? Down arrow. Wait, previous, that's what I wanted to do. Okay, sorry. Okay, so in 1980, Nigerians were among those who first came to that area. Again, the place where lots of refugees first settle in Dallas. The Nigerians came there often on student visas, and the men would come. And so several of them found Ascension, and they liked Ascension because it was the closest thing to Anglican that they could find. Which, if you're Episcopalian, should, I hope, make you smile a little bit. They were used to, in Nigeria, the Anglican Church is distinctively not Roman Catholic. And so things with lots of ritual, Marian prayers, things that are common in high church Anglican churches, were not comfortable for them. And so Ascension was welcoming to them, in part because of the very nature of its worship as being more broad or low church. And also because it was a more politically liberal congregation. In Dallas, Sunday mornings, like most of America, are very segregated, and were certainly way segregated in the 70s and 80s. And so African Americans and Africans didn't find themselves feeling very welcome when they would go into just any church. But in a politically liberal church, people were ready to embrace people of different ethnicities. So the Nigerian congregation, the Nigerian part of the congregation is fully integrated into the congregation, and are mostly middle class people with professional jobs. In 2001, the International Refugee Committee started settling the Lost Boys of Sudan in America. And they were intending to bring several hundred of them to Dallas in 2001. And that was before 9/11, but they started that process. And the Dinka, when they came, the Dinka is the tribe in southern Sudan. It's also the language that they speak. It refers to the fact that they're cattle people. I think Dinka actually means cow, and but it refers to their sort of background as people who raise and keep cattle. The Lost Boys had been in refugee camps for about a dozen years, mostly in Kakuma in Kenya. And as they came into the United States to be settled, they settled in various cities, but including Dallas. And we had one Sudanese guy in our congregation, Charles Ding, and he was assigned by the International Refugee Committee to help be a liaison for these new Dinka refugees, all young men, all single. And they brought 12 of these refugees into Dallas a week after we had launched our new mission statement. And our new mission statement said in part that we hoped to reach out in our neighboring community with missions that witness to the love of Christ. Everything we had done in outreach to that point mostly was further away, not in our neighborhood. It was downtown, sending money somewhere else. And so we wanted to take this bold statement. We didn't have a plan. God had a sense of humor, though, because at our annual meeting, we announced this great mission statement. And the next week, Charles Ding goes to visit these refugees to whom he's been assigned. And he asks them, "Did you get to church?" And they said, "Well, we got on a bus. It said the Church of Christ on the side. And we went, and they were very nice. But we don't have any idea what they were doing." Because they were Episcopalians. They'd been part of the Episcopal Church in Sudan. Their habit was Eucharistically centered worship. And they recognized the pattern of the liturgy. And so he said, "I know where you need to go to church." And so the next week, Charles drove his Toyota Corolla down to Vickery Meadows, where they were living, and in shifts drove them to Ascension. And so without any knowledge of any of us, suddenly we had 12 young men, clearly not Nigerian, clearly people we didn't know. Most of us had never heard of the Lost Boys. If you had at that point, you were much better educated about such world affairs than we were. But after the service, the congregation spilled out into the narthex and surrounded them, and that was the beginning of the Dinka congregation. It's now our congregation is about 20% Igbo, about 15% Sudanese, and about 65% sort of mixed, Anglo, African Americans, Hispanic, other African ethnicities, some Asians, just kind of a mix of people. The largest service we had last year, though, was on Christmas Day, December 25th. Do you know any Episcopal congregation anywhere where that's true? The Dinka, on their regular Sunday service, invited all the Sudanese from Dallas, and we had 790 people in our church that seats 400 and something. But they're certainly the fastest growing part of our congregation. Okay, so what is this place, Ascension? And this is an important question. Whenever you talk about multicultural congregations, we talk about it as if it's sort of one thing. And the truth is that there are a lot of different things, and we'll talk in a minute about about some different categories. Diversification at Ascension was never driven by neighborhood transition. It's not a neighborhood that was primarily one ethnic group and is changing over to another ethnic group due to economic changes or the deterioration of housing stock or anything like that. It wasn't driven by that, but by missional impulse. That the congregation understood itself as welcoming strangers. And so do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for in doing so some have entertained angels unawares, from Hebrews, of course. And that's the character of the church. If you all showed up there, no name tag saying you're from the seminary, being your most introverted self, no matter what your race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, family status, you would find that the people would seek to embrace you, whether you wanted them to or not. And the realization over the years, especially the last 12 years, that when Jesus said, "Go to all the nations of the world and baptize them," maybe he didn't intend at that moment that it was down the street, but that's the reality for us in Dallas. That if we're going to do mission work, we can go across the globe, and that's important to do. But the call to reach out to all the nations is a call to basically step out our front door and notice who's there and try and find ways to embrace them.